Hello, everyone. Adrian Joyce here, Director of the Renovate Europe campaign, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this webinar co-organized by the Energy Efficiency Hub and the Climate Group's Renovation Revolution. I can promise you that we have a very exciting and dynamic discussion ahead, and I hope you're going to learn and enjoy what we have to share with you. Just a word to say the Renovate Europe campaign is the knowledge partner of the Renovation Revolution. It is a political communications campaign seeking to increase deep energy renovation in the European Union to 3% per annum very rapidly. And we have 51 partners, including 8 national partners. The Energy Efficiency Hub is a government-to-government collaboration platform. It was established to foster progress on energy efficiency and has now been working, I understand, for 8 years. The Climate Group is an international non-profit organization with a mission to drive climate action across all sectors of the economy. And this unique collaboration today is going to bring together national governments, subnational governments, the private sector, in order to talk about accelerating building renovation globally. We have a 90-minute event, and it will consist of 3 distinct panel discussions. They will feature recent publications both by the Climate Group and the Energy Efficiency Hub, and we will have a discussion about doubling global energy efficiency ahead of the COP29. As most participants will know, that was adopted in COP28 as a target moving forward. I wanted to also welcome online participants who will be watching us in the recorded version of this webinar. We are very pleased that you're watching us at a later date. And finally, for those that are watching us live, that you will find a quick Q&A or questions and answers tab at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free during the panel discussions to add questions in that tab, as we will come back to those towards the end of the webinar in order to address the questions you have posted. So it is now my pleasure to introduce Tudor Constantinescu. He is the Principal Advisor to the Director General for Energy at the European Commission. He is the Chair of the Energy Efficiency Hub, and his work, he works on energy priorities and initiatives that are related to hydrogen and to financing the energy transition. Tudor, over to you for a keynote address. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Adrian, and allow me all to say how pleased I am also to be with you here today and to welcome you to this webinar co-organized by the Energy Efficiency Hub. And I'm here in the capacity, as Adrian said, also as chair of the Energy Efficiency Hub, which is a voluntary collaboration for government-to-government exchanges on energy efficiency policies, but also on regulations and implementation, focusing on topics relevant to the challenges the 16 members of the hub have. So the hub supports such discussions on different policy topics related to energy efficiency, being in buildings, being in industry, being in digitalization, and the relevant part for energy efficiency, with countries, with international organizations, but also with industry and other stakeholders, think tanks and private sector. This joint webinar, as I said, co-organized by the Hub as the Climate Group, is really an opportunity to bring the public and private sectors together to discuss the barriers and the solutions for scaling up building renovation in Europe and globally. Buildings, as we know, are the single biggest consumer of energy worldwide. And not only that, they are the places where we spend most of our lives, being at home, being in offices, and therefore they have a particular importance for all of us. Later today, you'll hear about the report produced by Energy Efficiency Hub and in particular by the Energy Efficiency in Buildings Task Groups, which is this report is funded by the European Commission, on models for deep energy retrofits. The report focuses on the experiences of several countries, including Argentina, Brazil, China, European Commission, Germany, Korea, Saudi Arabia, United States, and others. So for which buildings again are such an important, and energy efficiency in buildings is an important dimension to integrate in the overall environment which buildings represents for us, and to handle this together with other sustainability, health, and important aspects of our daily and working life. Deep retrofit is therefore an essential tool for making the buildings uh, a more friendly environment to live, but also for reaching our climate objectives for 2050. And therefore, the recommendation is this report, which is a result of a lot of exchanges and dialogues between policymakers and sharing best practices, but also understandings and sometimes different notions and different definitions, allowing comparability and allowing a widespread deployment of the concept which leads to this debt retrofit. But this will not happen by itself. Building retrofit is complex and capital intensive. We know that, and it's a process which requires collaboration between public and private sector. Therefore, I look forward to hearing the insights from the speakers today and to engage in discussion on what public and private sector can do together to accelerate building renovations. Thank you very much and welcome again.
Thank you, Tudor, for setting the scene so competently and for outlining the importance of this topic. And now to our second host to the Climate Group, I'm delighted to welcome Sam Kimmins, Director of Energy Systems at the Climate Group, to give us some keynote welcome words. Sam, over to you.
Thank you, Adrian, and thank you, Tudor, for providing context and a sense of urgency for this work. I'm Sam Kimmins, Director of Energy with the Climate Group, where our mission is to drive climate action fast. So for over 20 years, we're celebrating our 20th birthday this year, the Climate Group has built a large and influential network of over 600 businesses and 200 governments. And we're holding those organisations accountable and turning ambitious commitments into tangible action on climate change. Our energy work covers renewable electricity and energy efficiency with an ambitious vision of zero carbon electricity systems and helping to eliminate any need for fossil fuels. Our projects include RE100, which represents over 400 companies with combined electricity demand exceeding that of Germany, all committed to using 100% renewable electricity, and driving policy change through open markets around the world to renewables investment. More pertinent today, our EP100 programme, established in 2017, has attracted over 120 companies with ambitious goals, including doubling their energy productivity, that very much set a precedent and paved the way for the adoption of the Double Down agenda from governments at COP28 in Dubai. So today we're talking about the Renovation Revolution. As we've heard from the previous speaker, it's critically important that we tackle the carbon emissions of our existing buildings, which are responsible for 40% of energy consumption and 36% of greenhouse gas emissions in the EU. So our initial work on this has focused on Europe. With the launch of the Energy Performance in Buildings Directive, Europe is very much poised for a renovation revolution. But we need to get things moving now. In the EU, energy renovation rates are currently around 1% a year. It's going to take us 100 years at that pace to renovate the entire building stock, well below the 2.5% recommended by the IEA to reach net zero by 2050. So we've developed the Renovation Revolution Handbook as a resource to support the transformation efforts of the continent's building stock into zero emissions buildings by 2050. In a project supported by Carrier, CBRE, Danfoss, Signify, Siemens, Rockwool, Velux, and PwC, and developed through consultation across industry and governments. Through best practices, the handbook provides you with the strategic insights to unlock barriers and drive progress, with an emphasis on the roles of value chain actors. We've narrowed down on 5 enabling actions needed to scale and accelerate action, which we'll learn more about in the panel discussion. So whether you're representing a federal ministry focusing on energy, climate, urban planning or regional development, or representing financial institutes engaged in green finance. This handbook is tailored to inform you on what's needed to implement the EPBD effectively. While it focuses on Europe, we do welcome other stakeholders outside Europe to leverage the best practices and solutions presented in the handbook. Some of this is very specific, but some of it is applicable on a broader scale, and we do look forward to expanding the reach of the handbook to other geographies. We do have big ambition for developing phase 2 of Renovation Revolution, and we see scope for similar work in India and the US. This is a global goal, with learnings from Renovation Revolution being relevant elsewhere with a few tweaks. Today, expert panelists will shed light on the strategies in Europe to achieve the goal of the Renovation Revolution and how the handbook will help. This comes very timely ahead of COP29, where we really do need to make progress if we intend to meet our 2030 target. So without further ado, I hand back to Adrian and then on to the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam, for those welcoming words. Indeed, setting out the agenda for today very clearly. So now we're going to start the first of our 3 panel sessions, and each one is structured in a similar manner. We have a short impulse statement from an invited speaker, and then 3 speakers on the panel to whom I will pose a question and allow them to elaborate on that question. And our first session is going to be on the topic of catalyzing a renovation revolution in Europe. And in order to give us the impulse statement for this, I'm delighted to welcome Damilola Anju to speak to us from the Climate Group.
Thank you, Adrian. And also thank you to Tudor and Sam for that really great opening remarks. You've really mapped it out quite nicely. I'm really excited for us to dive into the panel discussion, but before then, let's set the scene, really zooming in on Europe based on our insights from the Renovation Revolution Handbook. If you could go to the next slide. So to catalyze a renovation revolution in Europe, it's clear that we must tackle the key barriers if we're serious about making meaningful progress around scaling and accelerating energy renovation rates in Europe. And so at Climate Group, we've been supporting these efforts through the Renovation Revolution project. And since February of this year, we've actively engaged our project partners and subnational governments in our Under2 network in action dialogues, sharing of best practices, as well as one-to-one consultations. And based on those discussions, we identified 5 key barriers in the Renovation Revolution Handbook. And we believe that if these barriers are effectively addressed, we can really move the needle. But I won't spend too much time going in depth. I will just briefly touch on them and then have our panelists give more insights. So first one we looked at was mobilizing of finance. So it's really clear that the conversation is shifting towards how do we attract finance? How do we really drive finance here? There is a big gap and we need money to actually effectively implement. We're looking at a gap of about 275 billion euros per year if we're serious about reaching the energy renovation targets in Europe by 2030. The second one that we looked at, and you notice that it's also in red because we feel that these are the biggest ones. So second one was labor shortages. So yes, we can put in all the policies and technologies, but we actually need people to implement and execute on those plans. And the other one we looked at was availability of up-to-date data. So we must recognize that every region has different starting points, and data can really help us understand that if we want to really understand what the magnitude of energy renovation is needed at each of those subnational levels. And we also found out that based on our consultations, there is still a need to update a lot of the data and making sure that they're up to date, as well as filling in those gaps in areas that they lack data. And then market adoption is one that's quite interesting. So as Sam mentioned, renovation rates in Europe are stagnant at 1%, and deep renovations are at 0.2%. But when you really compare that with the percentage of non-energy related renovations that happen in buildings per year, that's at 16% annually. So there's a huge gap, and we believe this is really due to a lack of awareness on the benefits of what energy efficiency measures could bring to key beneficiaries. And then the last one is permitting lead time. I mean, the target is for 2030, and when you look at it, we're like 5 years and 2 months away now. So if we're really serious about making that progress, we really need to speed up on that. But of course, you can learn more about this in the Renovation Revolution Handbook. Next slide, please. Besides the barriers, we really wanted to look at solutions today because we want this conversation to be quite solutions oriented. And so based on insights from our handbook, we mapped out 5 key enablers to drive action, to really drive progress. And what we see this as is also opportunities for collaboration. I'll also just briefly touch on each of them. So first one is co-creation and holistic approach. So when you really think about what is required now in the APBD in terms of the 2030, 2050 goals, we're looking at achieving nearly zero energy buildings and zero emissions buildings. And this has various components. And so we really need to think about it, looking at a very comprehensive approach that integrates energy efficiency, renewables, and smart readiness level of buildings towards reaching that decarbonization targets for buildings. Second one is project aggregation. I mean, we've already touched on the fact that we do need to mobilize finance, but meaning that we also have to de-risk projects. And one of the ways to look at it is dealing with scale. And that's why we have project aggregation there. We think it could be a good pathway to look at. Data and digitalization. So in the revised EPBD, so smart readiness levels of building, really raising that is a mandatory indicator for the National Buildings Renovation Plan. And this will also not only help us implement the EPBD, but when we think about the demand side flexibility, which you'll hear about more from one of our panelists today. And then the next one is just including energy efficiency as a priority in ESG frameworks. When we think again about finance, so ESG is one of the big things that can influence investment decisions. But unfortunately, a lot of those frameworks out there just doesn't put enough priority on energy efficiency. And then finally, a very interesting one, at least for me, combined incentives with EV charging pod. It might look like the odd one out, but when we looked at the revised EPBD, it also now requires promoting smart mobility using buildings as a hub to deploy EV charge infrastructure. But at the same time, when you look at the funds that went into energy transition technologies last year, EV got one of the biggest, just over $600 billion. So we think that this could actually be an opportunity in terms of attracting some funding to energy renovations, as well as building a wider awareness around the benefits. So for us, these are not just, don't see these enablers as just simply strategies, but also see them as pathways for implementations across the value chain. And with that, I will stop there. So I'll hand it over to our expert panelists and they will share more insight on how we can really catalyze a renovation revolution and put these enablers into action and also enhance collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you, Damilola, for setting the scene for our first panel. And I would like to invite those panelists to put their cameras on if they're not on already. and they will be Elizabeth Hoffman, Head of EU Affairs at Velux, Barbara Frasqueta, Policy Advisor on EU environmental policies and international networks in the government of Lombardy, and Tudor Constantinescu, from whom we've heard already at the Energy Efficiency Hub. And in her words, Damilola has really set the scene very beautifully, presenting us the challenges and solutions in the Renovation Revolution Handbook. And knowing that 80% or more of the building stock that is built today will still exist in 2050, and that, as Sam said, the renovation rates for energy purposes is below 1% in Europe at least, it's clear that for meaningful progress, we're going to have to scale up and accelerate energy renovation very, very quickly. So Elizabeth, turning to you first, the handbook has identified, as we've just seen, 5 strategic enablers to scale and accelerate progress using a holistic approach and co-creation. But based on Velux's contributions to this work, how can a holistic approach help enhance progress?
Well, thanks for having me at today's webinar. Maybe just a few words about Velux. We're a global market leader in roof windows and skylights, bringing daylight and fresh air into people's homes. And we started our journey on sustainable buildings already 25 years ago. And I'd like to focus really on the enabling conditions and the multiple benefits of energy renovations, which is also addressed in the handbook, because the renovation of buildings is very much about improving the energy performance and the carbon footprint, but also about better living conditions. And this is really where the need for a holistic approach comes in. And I'd like to briefly highlight just 2 of our projects on how we try to contribute to this. First, since 2015, we've been publishing the Healthy Buildings Barometer, tracking the state of European buildings beyond energy performance. And this year, we've done it for the first time together with BPIE, the Buildings Performance Institute Europe. And we started doing that barometer because it's widely recognized that health is one of the most important co-benefits of energy efficiency. And it's also a key incentive for people to actually undertake energy renovations, but there's still a lack of data. And it's a topic also that has often been overlooked when it comes to policy tools. So if we want more people to renovate, and this is clearly a must to boost our renovation target as identified in the EPBD, we must do a better job in communicating the benefits for people, especially now in the context of the new housing focus at European level. So we put forward this year's barometer, a holistic buildings framework with 5 interrelated dimensions, like focusing on health, human needs, sustainability, resilience, but also empowering people. And I know it's very easy to theorize on these kind of topics. So that's why we've also included like several case studies in the report on what's already done. And one of them is the Malakoff Raise the Roof apartments in France, which is also featured in the very handbook we're launching today, because it's a great example of an innovative way to be able to create new dwellings without actually requiring new building plots, simply by increasing the height of existing buildings. And that's what we need more of. And then just very briefly, the second project I'd like to mention is in spring 2023, we opened Living Places Copenhagen, a building prototype showcasing that it's already possible with today's technologies and an affordable cost to build Denmark's lowest CO2 footprint building. And while this methodology has been developed for new builds, it can also be applied for renovations. And if one thing has clearly shown to us through engagement with policymakers, but also other stakeholders who actually came to visit this building prototype in the last 2 years, is how important it is for people and also politicians to see and feel in real life how a low carbon building could look like. And so we need more examples like this going forward if we really want to scale up the renovation rates across Europe and beyond. So I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I mean, it's always wonderful to hear of these real projects where people can actually visit, feel and see and touch what we're talking about. So very inspiring to hear that Velux is at the forefront of this challenge. But now turning to Barbara Franschetta, we in the advocacy world, if you like, recognize that each region of Europe has unique opportunities and challenges, and that creating an enabling environment is essential to identify progressive paths towards energy efficiency, although difficult. And we feel that this can be achieved through innovation, regulation, and incentive-driven actions. But maybe you might give us insights on what exemplary actions you are taking in the Lombardy region to achieve a set of objectives in the face of, insufficient economic resources, labor shortages, as we saw. And are you bringing public and private actors together in the building sector? So, Barbara, maybe a few minutes from your perspective.
Okay, thank you for inviting me in this interesting webinar. I'm happy to bring the experience of my region. Lombardy region has been working for several years with the aim of providing incentives and measures to both the public and private actors in the building sector, which is fundamental to guaranteeing the energy transition. In 2022, the Energy, Environment and Climate Regional Program was approved by the government of Lombardy with these pillars. The first one is increasing efficiency in final energy uses, service sector, industry, agriculture and transport. The second one is development of local renewable energy systems. The third one, enhancing productive system at the service of decarbonization and clean economy. And the last one is resilience and adaptation to climate change effects. So the goal of this regional program is aligned with the goal of the EU Fit for 55. The cyber sector, as everybody covers the 40% of the total energy consumption. And so it is for us a priority to succeed in making all the buildings the more efficient, so to reduce the consumption and in the meantime also to increase the renewable sources. The program considers the effect and the impact of climate change and to make our building stock also not only efficient but also resilient to the climate change effect. We estimate the reduction of CO2 emissions compared to 2005 of 54% for the civil, and the final energy consumption reduction compared always to 2005 of 35%. And to increase the production of renewable energy system of 60% compared to 2019. For us, the renewable production means a photovoltaic, hydroelectric, heat pumps, and district heating. We don't have wind, so we cannot use wind as renewable. Our primary sector to invest in is the public construction, both because of the age of these buildings and both because they are easier to act for a government. For the private sector, it is the national government that acts with some tax deductions and also with the Next Generation EU funds. Our main source to act is the ERDF fund for 2021-2027 with 591 million. And we use this fund for the decarbonization and energy retrofit of buildings, plants, and infrastructures. And also we have an integrated approach in reburnishment. For us, it is important to have an integrated approach, so not only to have more efficiency regarding energy with the biodesign solutions and low impact materials, but or the sealing of public areas. So not only efficiency, but also resilience. And then we use this source of this money also for efficiency of public street light system and for the district heating systems. To maximize the effect of this funding, we decided to finance energy efficiency measures in a broader perspective, rewarding also projects that take into account the reduction of emissions over the entire life cycle of buildings and measures that make buildings more resilient. Complementary to these, to the EU funds, we financed also energy transition with the regional resources with a plan that is called the Lombardy Recovery Plan after the COVID pandemic to help the economy. With this plan, we have financed 30 million euro in retrofit, to 21 million in improving electric mobility, and 9 million in desealing and in urban forestation. Finally, I can bring as a lesson learned the experience of one call that was called FREE, Energy Efficiency Regional Financing Instrument, with the RDF of the previous legislative period of the Commission. And it is an example of a public-private partnership model with the EPC contracts and with ESCOs. And it was not completely successful from our point of view, because this model was successful, for example, for the retrofit of plants, the heating systems, and for networks component, or for public street light system, but not for more complex retrofits involving the building structure. So it is important also to say what it didn't work, and not only what it works when you are trying to make the energy transition. I think that is important, because it is not simple to involve the private sector from our point of view.
Barbara, thank you very much for that comprehensive look at what the Lombardy region is doing, and quite impressive, the work and the numbers you've told us. And thank you for that assessment of the success of EPCs and ESCO. Yes, something that does need to be looked at more, because it is such a promising model, but as you said, you had mixed results. And for bringing the resilience question into the debate, because resilience, we cannot overlook resilience as we see the very negative impacts of climate change across our regions, tragically, as we all know, in Valencia most recently. So now turning back to Tudor Constantinescu. Tudor, you've been listening attentively, and we saw that mobilizing finance was a significant barrier identified in the Renovation Revolution Handbook. Can you maybe give us an insight into some of the tools at your disposal at the European Commission to accelerate investments in building renovation? And how does the Commission support subnational governments in designing their own building renovation plans beyond the national building renovation plans of the directive? Tudor, over to you for another intervention.
Thank you very much, Adrian. I did prepare just a couple of slides quickly, if possible, for Christina to share them. Thank you very much. And in the interest of time, to move already to the next one. First of all, let me start by congratulating first Elizabeth for presenting this holistic approach to buildings and to building renovation. Indeed, it's extremely important to look at all these dimensions which are relevant when we speak about buildings and renovating, and we have seen this in the programs we have designed across the member states as well. To congratulate Barbara for really providing a very good example of what local regional authorities can do on energy efficiency, and how to design programs which are best fitted also to the circumstances of a region, to the needs they have, and also stimulating the skills, the jobs, but at the same time tackling the opportunities they have and putting together the solutions and the challenges. Now, next slide. Would say just 2 words about the innovation way, which you have mentioned as well, Adrian. This was an important call for us in 2020 already, so to renovate 35 million buildings by 2030 and to double the annual rate of renovations. And we have looked at a whole range of measures, including targeted funding, including strengthening information and trying to provide legal certainty to investors, to increase the technical assistance, to provide more support for the renovation of and developing of smart building solutions and digital solutions for buildings, to stimulate the construction sector and SMEs, and to link all this also to energy poverty. But we have seen, as you have said, that the progress is, and as it was underlined also in Lombardy region, it's not so easy, and we have to learn also from the difficulties and from the barriers we face, and sometimes even for some failures we have to admit in some cases. So, and how to stimulate and to go ahead. That's why one of the reasons was to come with the new revised EPBD. So next slide, please, which really try to have a more comprehensive approach compared to what we used to have in the past, and to stimulate where we really consider this necessary to stimulate more. For example, renovation, minimum energy performance standards, extremely important for non-residential buildings, first of all, and with the objective to trigger renovation of worst performing non-residential buildings, 16% by 2030, 26% by 2033 already. So to move these buildings to that level, is clear that maybe already by 2030 you need to think of the 2033 objective. So already maybe go to that step. At the same time, for the residential buildings, member states should adopt their own national trajectory with the aim for the whole group of buildings, including in the residential sector, buildings up to reduce primary energy consumption by 60% by 2030 and 22% 5 years later in 2035. So here it's a very much engagement with member states, but this will require, of course, a lot of work also on monitoring, on building the observatory, and to make sure that things are happening, and not just ex post evaluations, but continuous monitoring of what is going on. And ECPs are playing an important role, by the way, in that. And also with this, we have replaced the long-term renovation strategies with the national building renovation plans, which are much more ambitious. Linking also to the decarbonization plans, to introduction of zero emission buildings concept instead of nearly zero energy buildings, to the solar deployment in buildings, so more integration of energy efficiency and renewable solutions, coupled of course with the phasing out of fossil fuel boilers. First of all, not to subsidize them anymore after 2025, but also to develop plans with a view by 2040 to eliminate them. And this in a context in which the entire enabling framework has to become more supportive, with stress and energy performance certificate, but also with renovation passports, which allow actually the owners of the buildings and the users of the building to better identify and to have at their disposal the solutions planned in the best order when they speak about deeper renovation of buildings, one-stop shops, sharing the benefits between owners and tenants, and making this possible through deeper renovation standards. And finally, of course, a modernization and system integration approach, including the digitalization, including the aspects related to indoor air quality, including the infrastructure for sustainable mobility, in particular for electric vehicles, making it more stringent for the future, and the smart readiness indicator of building. Next slide, please. Of course, all this regulatory framework has to be accompanied by some financing, but allow me to say that financing was already for years high on the agenda. We have provided quite a bit of financing for buildings. I dare to say that in the current period 21-27, the EU funds only are approaching 100 billion euros, compared to the previous period when there were much less, but to a large extent due to the recovery and resilience, where we have about 65 billion euros in this period. Still, the regulatory framework here is important because it's clear an obligation for member states to provide appropriate financing support and stimulate private investments, even with all this money. And as it was, I think, underlined in terms of figures in the beginning by Damilola, we cannot rely only public funding. We need to attract private funding and we need to leverage. And this is actually essential. One of the lessons we learned in many cases was to try to do this leverage and to provide the grant intensity based also on the affordability, on the capacity of people to pay the energy bills and to pay for the renovations, because we need to deblock or unblock this resistance sometimes. And I have to say that first TPBD already came with a very important concept, which was cost optimality. Yeah, and this is an essential dimension, that you have to look at the overall cost over the years and not just the immediate cost. But still, we need to make the capex initially more affordable for people, and this is why we are trying to work on it. And in particular, and this is what the directive now stimulates, to provide these higher supports to vulnerable households and for deeper renovations. So member states again have to distribute the benefits of these renovations between owners and tenants, and we'll have a number of delegated acts to support the various parts of the directive, but also to provide a comprehensive framework for voluntary use by financial institutions and to increase financing volumes provided for energy performance renovations. So member states will also have to ensure there are one-stop shops in this respect, and the energy performance certificates and renovation passports should be made affordable to all categories of consumers. Next slide. The new commission, as you know, we are in the full process of getting the new commission approved, and for the first time, the new commissioner designate, it's a commissioner designate for energy and for housing. Had a great hearing, and we hope that other commissioners also have positive hearings, and the new commission may enter into force already and start to be operational in December. In his mission letters, there are clear indication about affordable energy, and this is something very important also when we speak about buildings, and then coupled with affordable housing, it's clear that it will be an area of work very important. To deblock here, we'll need to merge efforts and to have synergies on what is investments and skills, which are very important to make this happening, and therefore also to secure the funding for that. And therefore, in this respect, the doubling of the cohesion funds for affordable housing in the next MFF, and we are going to work with regions that, and wherever necessary, maybe even to adapt the state aid rules. So this is, of course, the whole work which is now in plan and in progress. But at the same time, accompanied, I have to say already now, but significant higher investments, as I mentioned before, for building renovation and coupling the different sources of funding, but also trying to get them at the EU level, but trying to get the member states also to support and to support a concept of more financial instruments and leveraging in order to attract private financing and to make give the predictability which makes for the private sector as a business case and the predictability necessary to invest in this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Tudor, very much for presenting that very extensive and comprehensive, even coherent framework that the European Commission has put in place. I'm going to thank the panelists from the first session. Time is against us, and we need to move to the discussion that will broaden the discussion to the more global level. So thanks to the three of you, but if you can, please stay with us because questions may well roll in from the audience for you to address towards the end of the event. So our next panel is going to address the question of achieving deep energy retrofits globally. And once again, we will have a scene-setting presentation followed by discussion with three esteemed invitees, Nasser Al-Ghamdi, Paul Kronjäger, and Tobias Huber, whom I will introduce more fully in a few moments. But to set the scene, could I invite Ludwig Labezinski from the German energy agency DENA to set the scene for this panel. Ludwig, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Adrian. Happy to do so. So yeah, I'm with the German Energy Agency, and today I'm in the role of operating agent of the Energy Efficiency in Buildings Task Group. And well, we are happy to present to you the latest work of this group, so the work of, well, this year. And just recently we published our report, summarizing report and a slide set on the topic. Next slide, please. Tudor already mentioned in the beginning who is member of this group. Tudor is also co-chairing this group. So the other co-chair is Germany. Paul will also speak on that panel. So a few additional infos on the EEB. We are a group that was established in 22. And on that report, on the deep retrofit models, there were further countries who were involved. Also speaking here in the session, for example, France and the US, also Canada gave some good contributions. We had help from the team of Trinomics. And well, let me dive into the report. Next slide, please. So first of all, we have to acknowledge that, of course, deep retrofit is one of several solutions needed to reach building decarbonization. There are other solutions as well, but we decided to focus on this specifically. As also with the Renovation Revolution report presented by Dami, we structured the barriers to deep retrofit. As we were talking with a group of policymakers, the first barrier we found, of course, deals with policy and regulatory barriers. The second one also looks at the finance part, so that was already pointed out here. Further barriers we structured as technical and social barriers. Also, the policy recommendations, we have discussed a few of those or heard about a few of those. I won't go into detail, but to mention, well, strengthening labor market and increasing financial support. Next slide, please. So what is deep retrofit? To begin with, there's not one definition to give you, but we can agree that it is a solution to achieve significant energy savings and reduce building emissions while achieving high energy performance. As we were discussing with quite a diverse group of regions, we found that there are, of course, different factors to determine the definition, looking at the climate, building age and type, historical, cultural, and economic context, as well as the existing legal and political framework. In the report, this comparison then looks a bit like this. I won't go into detail, but let me just highlight one aspect here. For example, the typical year of construction. Of course, looking at those regions, it's quite interesting to see if the regions have like older building stock. For example, in Germany, deep retrofit might play a far bigger role than in other regions where the typical year of construction is not as old as I would say. Next slide, please. So the definition of deep retrofit, as I said, there's not one, and we had a look at the different regions, how they approach the topic. Quite a few use a percentage approach, so they look at the percent of improvement before and after the retrofit, looking, for example, at Argentina and the European Commission. They say, okay, you need 60% of improvement to call it a deep retrofit. Other regions take different numbers, but the approach is the same. So looking at the United States, they say 40%, and Canada use the threshold of 50%. Other regions really take a threshold on a more technical basis, really looking at the kilowatt hours per square meter per year to define this threshold. Next slide, please. So a highlight of our study is definitely the collection of featured case studies and, well, policy best practice. And we found there are quite a few policies on the globe, which we all should have a look at and learn from each other. This is just a small selection, and time-wise, I won't go into detail here, as we will hear, for example, from Germany, Saudi Arabia, France, a bit more. Next slide, please. So yeah, I'd like to invite all of you to have a look at our report, of course. And if you have any questions and if you also follow our work, please reach out. And also I want to highlight that if you happen to be at the climate conference next week, there will also be a session just dedicated to deep retrofit. If you happen to be there and would like to further discuss, you're happy, we would like to invite you. Thanks a lot. Over.
Thank you, Ludwig, and thank you for being quick in what is a complex and comprehensive report. So now we move into the discussion part of the panel. And if I could invite the panelists to, if they haven't done so, put on their cameras. We will start. I'm just checking. Maybe I can be helped. I do not see. Yes, I do. Nassar Al Ghamdi, who is Director General of the Saudi Energy Efficiency Center. We know that you've been at the forefront of promoting energy efficiency in industry and buildings, but could you share one or two key policies that you've used to support energy efficient renovations in buildings, as that's the topic of today's discussion? And you're very welcome to our webinar.
Certainly. Thanks, Adrian. And I'd like also to thank the Hub and the Climate Group for giving us this opportunity to be part of this important webinar. And as you rightly mentioned, perhaps, the case of Saudi Arabia might be relevant for those who recently start or about to start energy efficiency or deep retrofit in particular. But if we step back, in our case, we've embarked on this energy efficiency journey back in 2010, which is not quite far, by establishing a center that act as a custodian of both demand and supply side. As the regulator, as a matter of fact, of energy efficiency, and later on was the regulator of the retrofitting or ESCO sector in the kingdom. But our energy efficiency policy approach look at energy efficiency holistically. And if you can move to the next slide, we're addressing both demand and supply side while considering the required enablers. And as part of the bottom of the slide, you'll note that the ESCOs is a key enabler for us to, in our energy, I would say, efficiency framework or toolkit. We truly believe that and to unlock the full potential of energy efficiency in building, we need to leverage retrofitting as a policy tool. But this was almost impossible to do so without addressing several, I would say, barriers that was clearly mentioned by my colleagues, either Ludwig or the previous panelist. And in our case, we believe that closing the gap, since we start, 12 or 14 years ago, closing the regulatory gap was key, and just to address the low-hanging fruit and pave the way for a broader or more advanced tool such as retrofitting. So we closed the gap for energy efficiency standards, regulation across all sectors, and more specifically in the building as a key milestone for us to achieve our energy efficiency aspiration and agenda. When we, a few years later, we assessed the industry, and the industry was nascent, and most of the players were international players that operate in Saudi Arabia as facility manager or operating and maintenance, and I'm talking about Johnson Control, NG, that kind of league. They have the energy, the ESCO or the retrofitting arms, but it was not, the case was not, appealing in the kingdom. This was obviously due to the same exact challenges that were addressed by Ludwig earlier, and be it technological, be it financial, regulatory, capacity building, etc. But the way we looked at the ESCO sector, we had to diagnose the full sector. And the following slide was not an overnight exercise. If you can kindly move to the next slide. We've adopted a comprehensive framework to activate the sector, and considering several levers, identifying the beneficiaries, identifying the key pillars that need to be addressed, contractual, regulatory, awareness, licensing to ensure the quality players are in place, funding, access to funding as well as identifying the type of services and what is the scope of retrofitting, because it spans from residential, commercial, government offices to even industrial facilities. And we understand that we will not be able to reap the full benefits as well without ensuring the required prerequisite in place or enablers that we can see in the framework. But we've addressed each of the aforementioned challenges in the course of, I think, the past 8 years. We've adopted several tools that helped us stimulate what we see as a framework in this slide. There was a key question because, as I mentioned, it was nascent. Shall we leave it for a market-driven, competitive. Obviously, there was no player. For the need, there was an emerging need for a national champion model or sustainable national champion model approach created by the government, and more namely Tershid, which is a state-owned company with clear mandate to retrofit all public buildings. And this company is never acts as a cost center for the government. It operates on commercial basis. And obviously, the establishment of the company is just one step. We had to work on other tools to enact the work or aspiration of retrofitting sector in the kingdom. And we've enacted a resolution to mandate all government buildings to be retrofitted. We've integrated the different energy efficiency, high energy efficiency requirement for all government procurement procedures and laws. We've created a task force for each and every government agencies linked to the highest rank, be it a minister or council or you name it. It's linked directly to that highest rank. And we've adopted some sort of an annual competition scorecard, tracked and KPI'd each year for each and every cycle. The licensing scheme to ensure only quality players are in place. And we started from 0 in 2014, and now we have more than the north of 60 full-fledged licensed ESCOs. The funding element and financing element was addressed clearly by my colleagues earlier, but we didn't want to reinvent the wheel, and we're leveraging existing financing funds for development funds for SMEs. We're creating a favorable financing terms, soft loans, grants to stimulate and trigger and instigate the sector. The model, the standards, templates, and contracts and legal protection provision for all parties, be it service providers, building owners, and beneficiaries, etc., are enacted. In addition to a national measurement and verification guide or protocol to protect all parties. We can never discard the importance of capacity building. It's an nascent sector. We just started. In the course of the past 6 years, now energy efficiency is available as a curriculum in every single university in the kingdom. Professional certification are offered, and we have even local trainers for the equivalent of certified energy manager, certified measurement verification protocol, certified energy auditors. We couple that with behavioral, I would say, campaign or awareness campaign to emphasize on the importance of retrofitting. And in parallel, we created a platform with local and international manufacturers for R&D, equipment manufacturing as a key source for research and development into new energy efficient technology. In a nutshell, we understand that the barriers are common, but each country has its own specific, I would say, context. In our case, it's a central agency. We started a bit, I would say, late. The government intervention was in the form, not in a cost manner, but it's more of a sustainable approach by creating a company that is not currently crowding the private sector and not competing with the ESCOs, but rather act as an intermediary between Ministry of Finance, who pays all the bills, and the ESCO providers as a project manager. It's an enabler to prosper and advance in this sector. I don't want to say what has worked with us as well, but to be honest, we thought that the private sector will be an organically reactive to the evolution that happens it helped us in increasing the number of ESCOs, the awareness, the regulatory aspect, building, I would say, the foundation of the tools for the access to funding and financing. But the private sector was perhaps slower in adapting to that. That's why recently we launched a couple of months ago a platform. It's a match platform under SEEK, or the Saudi Energy Efficiency Center, the regulator of energy efficiency in Saudi, to provide the business or the building owners opportunities and match them with the certified ESCOs in a digital manner. We're doing our roadshow and pitches with the coordination with the Chamber of Commerce, the high commercial sector consumers, because we want to build the momentum and ground for that to happen. We're still in that part, but just to recap, and I don't want to take a lot of your time, is the policy approach need to be comprehensive, and we cannot just jump into deep retrofitting without addressing a holistic approach that is relevant or more specific and appropriate for each and every context. While we agree on the high level, I would say, enablers or barriers, but each country might have their own, I would say, perspective and approach that help that particular country to pursue whatever is the aspirational target. With that, I conclude my point, and then back to you, Adrian.
Thank you very much, Nassar, for that very clear presentation on how different starting points in different countries lead to different solutions. And I'm always delighted to hear about ESCO models, because it is such a promising model, particularly in many countries across the globe. So turning now to Paul Kohnjäger from the Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs, and Climate Action in Germany. You are co-chair of the Energy Efficiency in Buildings Task Group, and we know Germany has been active in renovation for many decades, with publicly funded programs providing renovation incentives, etc., for households and businesses. Could you just share quite quickly, Paul, some lessons learned from these financing that you have undertaken over the years?
Thanks, Adrian. And hello from my side. Thanks also to all the presenters, to the climate group for the great collaboration. Congratulations on those 2 products that we've presented here. Let me try to keep it really short. Germany is faced, first of all, with similar challenges as most countries. When it comes to uptake of deep retrofits, we didn't have a very ambitious and especially consistent long-term regulatory framework yet. We didn't have the performance standards in place. We're getting there slowly. The EPBD is helping with that. We have high upfront costs. Financing deep retrofits, they're very expensive. They don't really pay themselves back very quickly. And of course, we also struggle with limited public funding to subsidize. We have the split incentive dilemma between landlord and tenant. Doesn't really make sense for landlords often to do deep retrofits. And then, of course, deep retrofits are highly complex. And so for many owners, it's just too difficult to organize them, basically. So these are just the general challenges. And now let me talk a little bit more about the financial challenges and what the German government is trying to do to increase the deep renovation rate, which just like across the European Union is well below 1%. So we really need to get up there. And as you mentioned, we have quite a long history of funding retrofits. And maybe let me just highlight maybe 2 programs. First, our federal funding program for energy efficient buildings. That is really one of the largest government climate action programs with 7.7 billion euros per year. But if you look at the 275 billion that we talked about that are needed EU-wide, that is really, just a drop in the ocean, let's say. It's a lot of money, but it's not enough. So what does this program do? We do support systemic renovations. So if you renovate the whole building to a high efficiency house standard, that can be residential or non-residential. We also support individual measures such as exchanging windows, insulating your buildings, and both of these go up to 20% of the total cost. Now, if you exchange your old fossil fuel heating system, we fund up to 70%. So that's also a sort of a political decision to go more into decarbonizing the heating rather than increasing energy efficiency. So that is really a political decision by the government. But still 20% is quite good, let's say, especially it's open this program to everyone, to private citizens, to homeowners associations, companies, housing companies, communal entities, and etc. Another program which might be interesting to this group, also to the climate group and the under 2 coalition members here, perhaps subnational actors, is a district level technical assistance program, which unfortunately, due to budget cuts, had to cease last year, but it really worked very well. It's called Energetic City Retrofits. It was administered by our development bank, KfW. And it really helped municipalities do local heat planning, local energy efficiency planning. So looking at a district and doing a comprehensive plan for the whole district, looking where do we do, what kind of heat provision and what kind of efficiency measures are needed, and then really making a plan for a whole area. And this program really helped leverage money. So €1 of public technical assistance funding leveraged up to 630 euros. Of investment. So unfortunately, it was cut last year. We hope it can come back at some point. It's quite similar to an EU program administered by EIB called ELENA. So maybe to get to the lessons learned, to cut it short a little bit, public funding is always limited, so we need to really target it well to those who need it. So we also need to think about energy poverty and really subsidize those people or communities that need it. We also need to put the money where it leverages the most money. And of course, we also need to make retrofits themselves more beneficial and affordable to the owners in the long end. I think Tudor also talked about Article 17 and 18 in the EPBD. There's also a lot of good stuff in there, which we as Germany, as a member state of the EU, now need to look at to implement. Also, a colleague from Saudi Arabia talked about ESCO models, contracting, green bonds, etc. There's a lot of innovative ways to leverage more private money. In the end, public money will be limited, unfortunately. So yeah, maybe that's my closing remarks. We need to really use public money to leverage private money, and therefore I'm also interested to hear more from the private sector perspective. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you for that great segue, because indeed our next speaker is coming directly from the private sector. I'm delighted to welcome Tobias Hoover, Sustainability Officer at Siemens. And one of the things we have been looking at, and it came up in the Deep Retrofit Model report, is the shortage of skilled labor and the instability of labor supply. But considering your expertise of Siemens and contributions in this area, can you share with us how Siemens supports progress on deep renovations while also working to address skills gaps in the labor force? We understand that specifically Siemens collaborates across industries and with education institutions to build a skilled workforce that can meet the demands of our growing sector. So Tobias, any light you could cast on that, we'd be delighted to hear it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Adrian, for the introduction. And first of all, I have to congratulate Nasser Al-Gandhi in Saudi Arabia, because I was there this 10 years ago when you were considering to start to establish a super ESCO, which you now have with Tasheed in place. And I recall, and that's the anecdote that segues into the topic, I recall that I was asked, can you help us to decarbonize our 100,000 mosque in Saudi Arabia? And you know what my answer was? I'm sorry, I do not have the resources. So it's about capacity building, about skilled labor, having it in place at scale. And that time, that already showed the dilemma that you need to build up these resources. Yeah. Before we go into the details, let me just take the big picture first. I mean, Siemens recognizes that we play a critical role as a private sector company in driving deep energy retrofits at scale. And we have seen and heard about those barriers that were mentioned. And the important point for me is they are highly interdependent. So for example, if you lack clear policy signals and you have not sufficient financing options, that will dampen your private sector investments. And then there's planning uncertainty for the private sector, and the private sector is hesitant to invest in growth, so it's hesitant to invest in resources. You end up with lacking resources, you have less competition, this leads to a price increase, and at the end that harms the return on invest of your deep renovation. And we have heard also a couple of definitions for deep renovations, country by country, and recommendations. But if you would ask me for the definition of deep renovation, The evaluation and commercial feasibility is driven by the ROI. Yeah. So at the end, the major difference between renovation and deep renovation is the payback. Yeah. And especially in the private sector, the payback criteria and requirements are pretty hard. So we talk 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, not more than 8 years. As soon as you enter deep renovation, you're in the range of 8 years. So therefore, this is an interdependencies of those barriers that we have heard. And so let's briefly go through it one by one and then focus on technical. So what I believe is very helpful from a policy and regulator side is if we have streamlined regulations and we set ambitious retrofit targets out there, then there's a framework given. And then I still believe the public sector could have subsidies, incentives, tax reliefs to tackle those financial barriers that we were talking about, either barriers in terms of the ROI or in terms of making new innovative technologies applicable and already useful. So there's important that we have a certain planning horizon. Otherwise, we create artificial markets that may boost up for a short period of time, but then they will die or be harmed at the long run. Yeah. So that's the framework on the policy and regulator side. And for financing, we heard about the upfront cost, that this is a major hurdle, especially for building owners and the split incentive. But we have innovative financing mechanisms in place. So shifting from capital expenditures to OPEX, so-called as a service models or managed service agreements. That's a huge lever that can be also linked with green leases and could be the foundation for public-private partnerships. But at the same time, lower payback expectations could be very beneficial to allow deep renovations. And that's something where the public sector could be at the forefront. And we have seen that a lot in the US, that the more and more they got confidence in the companies that do deep renovations and retrofits, the longer they allow the payback times. Yeah? And the problem statement, which I would definitely see for the building sector, is it's not about that there's not enough capital in the private market. The money is there. But when we talk deep renovation projects, we are in small categories. So you talk projects, 1 million, a few millions, 5 millions, maybe 10, maybe 20, maybe 40, maybe 50. But from the perspective of an institutional investors, this is too small. So they seek for ticket sizes, 100 million, 500 million, and so on. And so that means it's a very fragmented retrofit market with small investments that at the end have high transaction cost, due diligence cost, and so on, audit cost, which at the end makes financing less attractive, unfortunately. So that was, let's say, setting the scene with policy, regulation, and finance. Now let's look more on the technical part, yeah, which we are in. So the technical complexity of deep retrofits starts with the building assessments towards those solution designs, integrated holistic system designs. Therefore, you require specialized expertise, and this is very often short in supply. So we heavily have to invest in workforce trainings, and also at the same time develop standardized retrofit approaches. Yeah, so to have a standardized solution design that allows to multiply and scale across different buildings, different building types, despite the fact that buildings are highly individual and unique. Yeah. So that's the one aspect on training, development, and educational measures, and also standardization of our portfolio. The other one is true, it's digitalization. And digitalization has multiple aspects. It starts as with training, e-learning makes it available at your fingertip, but also the use of digital twins, using simulations, using projections. So before you start to implement, you have it ready. Then you really know what expertise is required, what labor skills are required. Yeah. And then also going digital, you could combine that with remote support. So that means not the person that is on site needs to do everything. It could be also that there's a back-end support through a digital service center that guides those people, installers and technicians that are on site. Yeah? And last not least, we rely on a network of subcontractors and value-added partners that help us to execute projects all together. And that's the foundation. So that's more the operational, the situation where we are in, what we're facing today. So what's about the labor force in the future? How does that look like? And that's where I want to start with R&D and innovation management. We founded 16 Siemens research and innovation ecosystem hubs with more than 75 universities, just to mention ETH Zurich, Technical University Munich, two of them I'm working closely with. So where we develop jointly, where we have joint research, and where we educate already the next generation of people coming out of academia that hopefully then work for us or the industry. That's more on the innovation and R&D side, but also from an operational side, a major group of our customers are in the university sector. So it's higher education, the vertical market of higher education. So in those projects where we decarbonize campuses across the globe, we collaborate with our customers, we co-develop with our customers, we operate joint living labs, we fund academia, and then at the end also look for the next generation to be ready and with a large proximity, high proximity to the industries. University of Birmingham or University of East London are two of those examples. And last but not least, if it sounds boring, showcase successful deep retrofit projects, inspire, educate building owners, policymakers, the broader public. That's also why we became part of the Renovation Revolution initiative. So let me conclude. Yes, we advocate for comprehensive policy frameworks, looking for financial incentives, and support the development programs for the future workforce that's need to then also having set the scene and mobilize private capital. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Tobias. That was really a great insight into what a major private sector company can do to drive forward and upscale activity in this field. Once again, I apologize, but I will have to move right on to the third panel due to time. So thank you to the three of you for these great inputs. And that third panel is going to address the question of delivering the global goal to double energy efficiency by 2030. We will have an impulse statement from Jonathan Sinton in a moment, and then we will have Cara Carmichael from the Office of the Federal Chief Sustainability Officer of the US government. We will have Mario Giordano, Head of Public and Government Affairs in Signify, and we will have Régis Meyer from the French Ministries of Ecological Transition. So without delay, Jonathan, over to you. And I guess we're going to run maybe 10 minutes over, but I want to give each panelist a chance to speak. Jonathan.
Thanks, Adrian. As you mentioned at the top at COP28 last year, nearly 200 countries set ambitious goals aligned with the target of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees, including that global target of doubling energy efficiency progress by 2030, which means that annual progress needs to double from a baseline of 2% per year to more than 4% per year, which is a big lift. Our colleagues at the IEA, where the Energy Efficiency Hub Secretariat is hosted, are tracking that progress and key outcomes. And tomorrow at 11 a.m. Central European time, they're going to be releasing their annual energy efficiency market report, which includes analysis of the past year's developments in energy efficiency of buildings, directly to today's topic. The market report also always has analysis of energy efficiency investment, which is also of particular relevance. And at the same time, the IEA will be unveiling their new energy efficiency progress tracker, which will make data on progress towards the COP28 goal available to all. So now, as we've heard, there are many financing tools at our disposal, and as Tobias mentioned, there's no lack of capital to be invested. The challenge is to channel that capital into energy efficiency projects. And there's lots of experience from many companies, many countries, many financial institutions in bolstering investment and efficiency. We've heard some of that, some of the lessons that can be drawn today from Lombardy's finding that the approach of one of their financing programs was appropriate for some types of investment, not for others. Heard from Saudi Arabia the demonstration that simultaneous deployment of multiple policy tools really helps ensure uptake of available financing. And I know we'll hear more during this session about ideas on how to scale up investment. Then it behooves us to take all available opportunities to spread these ideas. And since COP29 is meant to focus on investment, that presents just such an opportunity. For our part, as Ludwig mentioned, make sure the hub's messages on deep energy retrofits and buildings are heard there. We're holding a side event on the 15th of November at the Buildings and Cooling Pavilion. That's going to be live streamed. We're sharing a link on that in the chat. So I'd like to hand back to you now, Adrian. Yield the floor.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. And indeed, good to turn to this global challenge of doubling energy efficiency actions. And for that, I'm delighted to welcome Cara Carmichael from the USA. We are going to try in this session maybe to link the Renovation Revolution Handbook and the Deep Retrofit Model Report back to the COP29 context. And according to the recent UAE consensus report, an estimated $2.2 trillion per year will be required to 2030 to achieve the target of doubling energy efficiency. Could you share with us what specific actions you're planning in the US to take to support these goals? And how do you see collaboration across the sectors we have on this webinar helping in that effort?
Great, thanks, Adrian, and thanks for inviting me to join this important conversation today. And I also want to thank our hosts, the Climate Group and the Energy Efficiency Hub. So to share a little perspective from the United States, two things I'd like to touch on: our policy framework and the results that we're seeing. So from a policy perspective, in the United States, the federal government is leading by example in our federal buildings portfolio. So in 2021, President Biden released the most ambitious agenda to date to tackle the climate crisis. Executive Order 14057 places federal operations on track to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. And the federal government owns and operates one of the largest portfolios in the world of over 300,000 buildings covering almost 3 billion square feet. So we have an imperative to deliver results. So this executive order targets a net zero emissions federal building portfolio by 2045, including cutting emissions in half by 2032. And there are specific provisions in the executive order to advance deep energy retrofits, energy use intensity reductions, and efficient electrification that reduces scope 1 emissions. And that's a really important strategy to reduce the impacts of climate change here in the US. So stepping back, big picture, we're aiming for super efficient all electric buildings. Two results, we're investing more than $1 billion from President Biden's Investing in America agenda to upgrade our federal buildings to be more efficient and all electric. And we expect this investment will help us achieve net zero emissions for approximately 2,000 federal buildings by 2030. Additionally, and there's been a lot of great conversation around performance contracting, we're aiming to leverage over $8 billion in private capital through public-private partnerships as part of the Climate Smart Buildings Initiative by 2030. And this initiative aims to cut GHG greenhouse gas emissions specifically through by using performance contracting. And at the federal level, performance contracting EPCs, they provide well over half of the investments in energy efficiency and renewable energy for our federal buildings today. So successful performance contracting, as was mentioned, is heavily dependent on strong collaboration. A recent announcement just last week, the US Department of Energy announced nearly $150 million in funding for 67 energy conservation and clean energy projects at federal facilities across the US and in some international locations. And this funding largely goes towards performance contracts. And what's really incredible about this investment pool in particular is that for each federal dollar spent, it leverages $13.50 in private capital. So we're taking this $150 million investment and it's delivering $1.6 billion in upgrades to our federal buildings. Lastly, I just want to share one really exciting project that we've undertaken. It's a textbook example from our perspective on decarbonization for the US government. And it's the Ronald Reagan Building and International Trade Center in Washington, D.C. It's the largest building in Washington, D.C. And it received a deep energy retrofit, cutting energy use by over 40%, and is now in the process of electrifying. And both efficiency and electrification are being delivered through a performance contract. So we're really excited about the progress we've made, excited about future opportunities. With that, I'll stop. Thank you, and back to you, Adrian.
Thank you so much, Cara. It's great to hear about those public-private partnerships and the success of energy performance contracting in the US. You really have been an exemplary example of that over the years, certainly to my knowledge. So turning to the private sector, Mario Giordano, Head of Public and Government Affairs at Signify, we hear terms when we're discussing this topic like nearly zero energy buildings, zero emission buildings, etc. And these are considered as benchmarks for decarbonizing buildings. But maybe you could inform us, how can smart lighting systems support us in reaching those funny terms, nearly zero energy buildings and zero emission buildings, particularly in terms of enhancing demand side flexibility and smart readiness of existing buildings as opposed to new construction? Mario, some thoughts?
Hi everyone, thanks Adrian, thanks to all the panelists. A lot of the information so far. I took a lot of notes. I think that in most of the cases we have a big focus on new buildings. So when we start designing a new building, then we think that we should put there, the cutting edge technology. While the most advanced technology should also be considered in the deep renovation of existing building, because the opportunity actually is there. And going back to your question, so to lighting, I think that the first point, which is probably the easiest answer, is about energy efficiency. So a smart lighting system can help to reduce the energy consumption in building by simply, turning lights on and off when it is not needed. It looks, so obvious, but believe me, this is like how a human behavior can be transformed into an automatic behavior. Because how many of us have, in many cases, we don't turn the light off when it is not needed because we are too focused on what we are doing, or simply because we forget. So moving from a human behavior to an automatic behavior. And then also because we can control, thanks to connected lighting, thanks to sensor, also the occupancy or the daylight levels, because we don't know how much light we need, while the sensor can really help to give us the right quantity of light needed. And on top of this, I remember that Dami was mentioning also the importance of data, and also Tobias was mentioning also the importance of digitalization. All this information can be grouped and can be transferred to building managers. That, as Tobias was saying, can be also based remotely. They there is no need for them to be there. So those data can be stored, can be used maybe in the future by artificial intelligence, or for some analysis to increase the performance of those buildings, or to increase also the quality of the environment in which we are living in those buildings. The second point, and this is only possible thanks to the connectivity, is the demand side flexibility. Meaning that integrating, and this is also prescribed by the EPBD, if we are talking about the European framework, the European Performance of Building Directive requires some kind of integration, some box integration. Imagine that having lighting integrated with HVAC or with other equipments. In this way, you can balance the energy demand and the supply. In this way, you can increase the flexibility of building, and it can reduce also the loading on the energy grid, which is overstressed because of the electrification process we are currently observing. And the third, let's not forget about it, because the buildings are important because we are living in those buildings, is the occupant comfort. Also in this case, the EPBD mentioned what is called the indoor environmental quality, and it will be up to the European members states to define a little bit better what the indoor environmental quality means. That the smart lighting system can provide personalized light settings in order to increase the comfort and increase the productivity also. Because when we are talking about lighting, we are not just talking about our households. We are talking about the offices, public offices, private offices, industrial facilities where the productivity it's fundamental, or even sport infrastructure. The sport infrastructure are high energy intensive. And the fourth point, and which is connected also to the others, is the remote control. Let's not underevaluate the importance of the remote control, because in this way we can reduce also the number of people required in order to manage building. We can also, Dami was also referring to the project aggregation. Project aggregation is perfect for financing, but is also perfect for management, because when you are able to aggregate more projects with the same behavior, with the same scheme, probably you can also learn and predict a little bit how you can implement new measures to increase the efficiency of those systems. And also because also Cara was mentioning projects, the project will be featured most probably in the report, Renovation Revolution. I would say there is a project everywhere. We just decided to highlight one project, which is the Crystal Tower in Madrid. Why? Because this is a deep renovation when the lighting, so the luminaires have been renovated, and on top of the luminaires, also the system, the integration with the system has been integrated with an energy saving of approximately 50%. So from a building which was, let's say, obsolete, or as we say in the lighting business, conventional lighting, the lighting has been totally renovated with energy efficient LED, because also in this case, LED is not all the same. There are different kind of LED also here. So let's talk about energy efficient LED, and also integrated with sensor, delivering, energy efficiency up to 50% in this case, and also increase the quality of the people that are working into this very, very interesting building in Madrid. Thanks, Adrian. Back to you.
Thank you, Mario. And indeed, I love hearing about good examples, and that sounds like a great one that I hadn't heard of until now. So I'll certainly be looking it up. And now coming to our final speaker, and Régis, you've been patiently waiting. Sorry about the timing. It's been a challenge to keep within the 90 minutes. But we're very aware that France has been implementing a comprehensive suite of policies for building energy renovation. And I wondered if you could help us to understand how these national initiatives can align with global multilateral frameworks for decarbonization and resilience in the building sector, such as the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction, the Déclaration de Chaillot, and the Buildings Breakthrough. Can these efforts complement the goal of doubling energy efficiency and advancing international collaboration? Régis?
Thank you for this very interesting question. So, only to go back to the genesis of this international collaboration that France wants to initiate with others, with Germany, with UN Environment, and many United States as well, where France has been engaged from 2000 on a very comprehensive policy to support in-household energy efficiency in existing buildings. It's around 10%. Excuse me. It's around 10% of the heating cost of the household that is spent to support investment in energy renovation, or around. So either by tax VAT reduction, so 5.5, by the zero loans that are dedicated for everybody, But now the evolution of this policy is to target more low-income household through grants dedicated for that, the MaPrimeRénov'. So, and we add some maps banning progressively less energy efficient rental housing. And that is quite hard because we are facing a housing crisis in France, but in Europe. And probably it will be a little more delay, but it's still there, and I don't think it will be cancelled. But it's hard policy, so to have maps on that. So, but we try to settle that. Second, we had as well a very interesting policy on tertiary non-residential building, implementing an obligation, a pathway obligation to decrease final energy, covering a private and public tertiary building over 1,000 quadrat meter. So, and that is very interesting because we had 5 or 6 years discussion with building owners. They went with voluntary agreement at the beginning, and now we implement that as a obligation to report that. So the question is, we dedicate a lot of energy and funds on the regulation on that national policy, but the meaning is, okay, we are doing that for energy saving, for the wealth of people, but as well for climate. And concerning climate, for sure, it has no meaning or less meaning if we are not embarking countries in the emerging world or the developing world, where most of the new building will be added. For sure, the deep renovation is a very important policy for Europe, America, Japan, where almost all the building, or maybe 20% will be added in the next 30 years. But it's opposite ratio, maybe more than increase or doubling of the surface or tripling of the surface in the emerging. So we don't want to want to avoid to construct new buildings that are ready for renovation, because not aligned to the net zero and resilience pathway. That's why at COP21 we thought that we need to have this international cooperation strength on that subject, and that we start with a platform of the on climate for the building sector, the global ABC. It has been focused on more dedicated priority international action through the breakthrough agenda, so the buildings breakthrough at COP28. And we thought that we need to have a more political visibility. That's why we propose to organize the first ever global forum on building and climate, including a ministerial meeting that finalize the Chaillot Declaration on the common vision on what policies and means and international cooperation should be developed to assure that we are on track, aligned with the Paris goals. That's the general framework, and for sure, the energy efficiency in building working group of the Energy Efficiency Hub take part in that scene. And I think it's very important that now we have the capacity to bring all government to have a dedicated ministers that can come every year to a meeting. And that's why we add in this Declaration Chaillot in Article 7.2 the fact that we will establish intergovernmental council for building and climate, where annually government represented by a minister in charge of that policy will gather, exchange, and so on. It's not to duplicate, it's only to converge information and experience. For instance, the added value of your work under the Energy Efficiency Hub in the building working group can be relayed in that council event or meeting, ministerial meeting. And that we will announce the institutionalization, of that council at COP in Baku, the 20th November. That's the general frame that we think it could be useful to have a really strong visibility and engagement in that policy. Thank you.
Regis, thank you so much for explaining how those different levels of interaction link together and contribute towards the COP28 goal of the doubling of energy efficiency. Very, very interesting indeed. Once again, time is against us, but thank all of the panelists, not just down the third panel, but all of them. And I'm very pleased to hand back to Damilola Adeyanju to close the webinar for us. Damilola.
Thanks, Adrian. Yes, what an insightful session this has been. A big thank you to all of our panelists that joined to share all of their valuable insights, and everyone who also joined this webinar today. Thanks for joining. But before we close, I thought it would also be nice to just let you, to give you some next steps about Renovation Revolution. So yes, we are just about concluding phase 1 of the project, but just so you know, we don't intend to stop in phase 1. We're looking at launching phase 2 in the coming weeks. So if this is something that you would like to know more about, please do reach out. And yeah, so I'll just also remind you that we have a event at COP where we'll be joining the EE Hub at their session. Yeah, so if you're at COP, please join us. Let's continue the conversation on activating a renovation revolution. So thank you all for joining this webinar.